Hello and welcome to the MaxLove Project Podcast with Audra and Samantha. Sam, I call you Sam? Would
Either
you
one.
really? Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like out in the world, I refer to you as Samantha, but then
hmm
personally, I refer to you as Sam.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I think that's the dichotomy with that.
okay. So our listeners will be okay if they know you as Sam
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Sam's good.
Samantha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is our very first episode. And we were just talking before this about how we were going to present this podcast. And I think we have some values that we bring to it. One of them is transparency. And for me anyway, honesty, transparency, and just authenticity. Like in terms of how we present this, we don't have a fake background with logos, and we don't have an editor. We don't have a soundtrack. We don't have ads. We don't have any of that. So I don't know if it even counts as a podcast, to be honest with you. We won't be distributing it that way. We're going to distribute it on our YouTube channel. And they have like a podcast channel function, and we're going to distribute it in our app, MaxLove Project Connect, but that's about it. And the goal here is to really be able to have candid and open conversations so that our community can not only get to know us more, but we can bring in people who we really respect. We value their perspectives, their research, whatever it is, and we can get more insight, especially for our childhood cancer, rare disease programming. We're really interested in bringing in people who can be supportive of our families and their journey. So that's what we were thinking with this, but who knows? I mean, what we'll end up talking about and who we'll end up bringing on board. So we wanted to use this episode to do more introductions of ourselves. Are you willing to start?
I can start.
Okay.
Yeah, in general, to add on to, I'm really excited about this because I think what's helpful in these type of conversations is, a lot of goes behind the scenes with what we do at MaxLove, and it's so much learning and insight because at the end of the day, we're also just moms. We're childhood cancer moms, and having those conversations, behind the doors is also really enlightening for other people. Like we have a lot of experience. We've, talked to people, and being able to have those conversations just broadens that access to information. So I think I wanted to add, that's a large goal of why we're, putting this out there. So I'm really excited about that. I can introduce myself. I'm Samantha, or Sam. I have 3 kids. Liam's my oldest. He's now 11. And then I have twin girls, Lucia and Camila. Lucia is now 7, and Camila will be forever 5. When she was a year and a half old, she was diagnosed with DIPG, which is a high-grade glioma in the brainstem. Hers was in her pons. She got diagnosed with like seizure-like activity. So there was one day where she actually just stopped breathing. My husband found her on the floor, like almost trying to catch her breath, and turning different colors. So obviously very scary. He called an ambulance. They did a bump, maybe she fell on her head kind of protocol, just watching and waiting to see if anything happened. And nothing did. And then we started the long diagnostic journey of, is she having seizures? Is she not? Which include an EEG, which was normal. And then she continued to have these weird posturing episodes where she would kind of like just stare and go limp almost. I remember one specifically, we were out to dinner, and she had a bowl of mac and cheese. And it was right after she ate that bowl of mac and cheese, she kind of just like, she didn't fall, but she like laid down on the table and was just kind of like staring, and it just looked very seizure-like. So it was that triggering moment to be like, okay, something's wrong. So that's when they rushed an MRI instead of, continuing to watch her. And that is when it was May 2018 where she got an MRI. And we were told that night, we tried to do like the night MRI where she would sleep through it, and she did it, which is surprising for a 1.5-year-old. But it was that night where we stayed in the hospital, and everything kind of started. She then got, a week later, she got the the biopsy showing the H3K27M mutation, which was a stage 4 DIPG diagnosis. And with DIPG, it's labeled terminal at diagnosis. So we were then led down that path of trying to digest, this is 2-3 weeks time of going from child healthy, we don't know what's wrong, to, this is very bad. And that's really hard to process. I think with their standard of care with the IPG, it's palliative radiation. So it's not even anything that will keep the tumor at bay. It kind of just has like this honeymoon period. It will give you an extra 6 to 9 months, they say. So we were presented with that option, and I think probably a combination of how quickly everything went, as well as her age, because she was only 1.5 years, we decided not to do it. We couldn't really process putting a little girl through that who just
A
didn't
baby.
know. A
Yeah,
baby,
really.
right.
Huh.
And I remember telling that to the doctors, and they were very confused on why we would choose that option. They were kind of like baffled that we would do that, but it was, and I think I thank a lot my husband for it, because he was very concrete with that, of like strong in that decision. And I think it's kind of like you can get sucked into like going against like what your heart says versus what the doctors are saying.
Right.
And he was very concrete about that. And I learned to appreciate that, later on. So a lot of, obviously we decided against the palliative radiation, but we were really, it kind of sent me down this rabbit hole of, I'm not just gonna do nothing, right? I'm not just gonna
Right.
watch, Camila succumb to this disease. So I remember before she got her MRI, I was researching diets for, because I thought it was seizures, right? So I was researching like seizure diets, and that's when ketogenic came up, and I was already researching it. So it was in the back of my head. So when I heard brain tumor, when I heard the prognosis, I was like, okay, I'm going to change her food. And it was one of the first things I did. After her MRI, I just started taking out things. I started, taking out the processed food, the orange juice, like things like that, that I knew were could be contributing to this like overexcited brain that I thought it was. And even in the hospital after her biopsy, I remember just buying a big thing of berries and being like, this is the fruit you can have, just like like sticking with that. Like, I know this fruit is good, kind of removing anything else behind it. And I was supplementing with MCT even right after her surgery. So just taking like cream, water, and MCT and kind of inducing ketosis that way. So I kind of knew what I was doing, but not really, honestly. So we started that pretty early with the help of Miriam too. She wrote Keto for Cancer, the book. And I remember like during my hunting, I just walked into a Barnes and Noble and I found that book, which is kind of, universe, I feel like. But yeah, just to fast forward the rest of her journey, she went almost 36 months, or it was 32 months without any sort of radiation. She had
Incredible.
an amazing quality of life. We just went in for checkups, honestly, and she was doing ketogenic diet. We did cannabis medicine as well and various supplements. So she was able to maintain stability for that long, only doing that. I know a large component is of her age. She was younger at diagnosis, but I really think if we had done radiation that quickly, when the doctors told us, she wouldn't have lived. She lived 4 years after her diagnosis. So that's how I got involved with MaxLove too. During that, searching for keto, obviously Max came up, you came up, everything that you were doing for Max at the same time. And I was, in the bubble of the hospital, nobody was helping me. I would go to the nutritionist, I would go to the neurology clinic, and nobody was helping me. The neurology clinic, which does it for epilepsy for kids, they kind of said, we don't do that for brain tumor patients. We can't help you. And I was just constantly like being told that I can't help you, I can't help you. So where I did find help was MaxLove, just even the education piece and sharing, this is what we do. What do you do? So that's how we got connected. I think it's really important. I think even specific to keto, having parents make that decision, being able to learn and make that decision for their kid. But yeah, I think that's a good roundup. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. Did Miriam introduce us, or did you find us independently? Do you remember?
I think independently. I think it was around the same time.
Okay, yeah.
Like it was like as I was searching and hunting that it was, but it might have been Miriam. I'd have to look back at that. It might have been her.
It might have been. I feel like I remember her saying, I have a family to introduce you to, because that'll happen, periodically, I wonder. But yeah, she's an incredible resource, and it's like amazing that you walked in and found her book. Like that is,
yeah, because she's also a brain tumor mom, and she used it for her son Rafi, and how much it helped her too.
At the earliest of days. We'll have her on the podcast, and she'll tell us about how harrowing it was to do that for her son, with the odds stacked against them of the entire medical community around them resisting it, telling her she was doing something dangerous.
Yeah, her story is astounding.
Yeah, it really is. So tell us a bit about what you do with MaxLove.
Yeah, so now I kind of try to make, because I'm a reader, so the way that I process information is it's almost easier for me to do the research, right? Like I like to just read. Like I read Keto for Cancer. I read all the resources within MaxLove. Like I retained all that. I enjoyed it almost like that was my vehicle. So a lot of what I do with MaxLove is trying to broaden access to the information almost in different ways. So I try to take research-based things and make it as digestible and as accessible as possible, which I think is vital, for our community.
Yep.
When parents are going through this, it's only some things stick, right? Only some things, get in and be processed. So I think,
especially at the beginning, right? It's like maybe 5%.
Right.
At the beginning,
So what I do with MaxLove is I try to take, the keto guide, or we have the nutrigenomics thing, and try to make really vital information that's important to understand when you're trying to do something like this for your child into, as easy as possible. So that's a lot of what I do, which I say it in that way because that can mean anything. It can turn into anything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice and broad because it's true. You're like our head translator. You do all of that translational work for us, and taking really complicated information and making it accessible to our families in a variety of modalities. And so your content manager, you're big part of the community contributor in our online community. And then you're also a founder of our Turning Towards Grief program. You not only participated with Veronica DeRosa, who we will interview as well, in writing that program, implementing it kind of in the same way, taking a written program and translating it into something that is easier to travel through, but then also coming up with the format, helping to facilitate the group and gather the group and bring the group together. And now we're headed into our third cohort of that. So you wear a couple of different hats, one of which is really deeply with our grieving community, and then also with the parents who often are in some of the immediate throes of the journey, looking for support with nutrigenomics, looking for what the ketogenic diet can do for them and other modalities. Is that a kind of comfortable place for you to be between kind of on both sides of that, if you will, of that fence? Or I don't think it's a fence. I mean, I think it's a difficult way to put it, but it is I think for our grieving families, or I would say bereaved families, because all of our families are grieving, but if they know it or not, you have experienced everything possible really within the childhood cancer journey for families who are not yet bereft, or aren't there. I say yet because again, we all
grieve
will be at some point.
Yeah.
that totality isn't the same, right? And so that's why I see it as like two facets of the same, very much the same journey. And you find yourself in all of it, I guess, is the best way to put it. You're immersed in the whole journey. Families going through every single part of it. How does that like land for you, being a bereaved mom yourself?
I think the word that comes to mind is I always have to be mindful of balancing. I think I'm still extremely passionate about the fight and the battle. Those words aren't the best, but I know people use them in the sense of it can be better. I'm very passionate about like the quality of life can be there and it needs to be there. I think seeing kids and just knowing that in some small way with what we do, it can be better.
Yeah.
So I'm very passionate about that. And that's a lot of, that side of being that passionate person of educating, even still learning. I still enjoy learning about how it could be better.
Yeah.
Educating, even going to conferences and trying to talk to doctors, trying to talk to parents, and making that bridge between what my family's been through, what I've seen help, versus trying to make them pay attention and also invest in this type of support, not just treatment options. Like, let's support the whole child. I'm very passionate about that. And then the other side in grief is, in bereavement, you don't really know until you get there. That's like kind of the feeling I have. So I also view that as like, in some way, a gift I have now. Like I know how to be there for somebody and I can feel it. It's an essence. It's something that I don't know how to, like, I'm trying to come with the words, but it's something that I know is like my duty now, because there's not many of us in the world, or even like within your town, within your community. You're not going to find that same support.
Right.
Unless it's another parent who's lost a child to cancer. There's also that medical trauma that's added to it.
Right.
That's very niche. So I think I look at it as like a balance of, this is what I can focus on now. This is what I can focus on now. And I am constantly like, what can I handle right now? Because sometimes working with families, I have to make space for my own grief. And that's something I'm incredibly mindful of, I need to, as I continue to support and help and use what I have to make things bigger and better, I have to, sometimes retreat and say, it's time for me to process my ongoing grief as well.
That's really powerful. So then do you find at those times that your activism, that part of you that is in the activism for quality of life care, like having these multiple places to be energetically active and involved is helpful, not just one. In a sense, like being able to be in these different spaces, depending on what your internal system is needing at the time is helpful.
Yeah. I think having those pockets to be like, okay, I'm ready for this today.
Yeah.
This week, I'm ready to, activate this part of me that's wanting to, because all of it I'm passionate about, but I'm very mindful of what can I handle today. That's kind of how I look at it.
I love that. I think it's beautiful. Well, we are so lucky to have you. I have always been in awe of you. I'd love to at some point talk more about that processing in the first couple of weeks of Camila's unfolding diagnosis process, because I've known you from the very beginning as an active processor. You're not someone who looks away. And I wonder if that was activated at the time. And do you have is this just a part of who you are and how you've approached your life? Have you been an active processor your whole life? Is this something that you've engaged with your inner world? You've engaged with your emotions, haven't turned away? Is that something that you learned over time? Because that's how I know you. I don't know you prior to Camila's diagnosis, but what I do know of you is very, very, very rare you're just amazing, because from the very beginning, you were actively present
Mhm.
with what you were going through in such a powerful way, like a beautiful way, like just open to what was coming up for you, what you were experiencing, what you were
Mhm.
going through, processing, being with it, and kind of not turning away to the point where it would catch up with you at some point in a way that you couldn't see. It always seemed like you were there with what was happening
Mhm.
within you and to you as well.
Mhm.
I think it's a remarkable skill. To me, it's a skill. It's a skill
Yeah.
of emotional processing that you've had, that I've always experienced you that way. And I think you're a tremendous asset for other parents to experience that as well. Is that something that you had going on before
I don't
Camila
know.
was
It's a good
diagnosed?
question. I would have to like, sometimes in a traumatic situation like this, like I'm a new self. So I almost have to like go back and think about my old self
Mhm.
a little bit. But
Yeah.
something I feel like I've always had, or something that I really value and try to make space for, is my intuition. I
Mhm.
think this feeling that helps guide me is kind of how I move. And even when Camila was in that diagnostic process, I remember, 'cause like I told you about that mac and cheese,
Yep.
like, and I saw that and I was like, my intuition was like, you need to look at what she eats.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was that kind
Yeah.
of feeling
Yeah.
of, that mother watching their child go through this. You can be
Yep.
like, there is that power within you to be
Yep.
like, something's going on here, and to not ignore that part of you that's
Yeah.
saying, look at this, look at this, look at this. So that's
Right.
really is
Right.
how I moved in that space. And I feel like I may have been like that. Um, just being passionate about what I know and moving that direction.
Yeah.
And uh, so that's what was coming up for me in those early weeks of like, nope, I was very, this is in a lot of ways, it's compulsive, it's obsessive. And
Yeah.
there's those parts of it too that are not always
Mhm.
good in
Mhm.
this process. Like that's where I was really trying to hang on to somebody who could help me, because I was like, I know I can be obsessive and maybe doing this completely wrong. And
Interesting. Yeah.
that's why I was
Yeah.
looking for
Mhm.
support and
Yeah.
being, this is what I'm doing. And I know I'm want it to be in this realm of how to support her, but I need that
Mhm.
reassurance that I'm doing things correctly and as best I could. And I think that's a good segue to you and Max, and your story with Max was something I greatly look towards, of being like, look at this mom, look at what she's doing. I remember one Facebook post where it was one of Max's reoccurrences, and you kind of showed a before and after with keto, and just showing,
Oh,
we
yeah.
saw this, we implemented strict keto
Yeah.
again, and look at what
Yep.
happened.
Yeah.
And so your story with Max, it was one of the biggest reassurances for me that, this is something I can actively do and will actively help her.
Well, I really appreciate that, knowing or hearing that, even though the diagnoses are so different, but
Mhm.
that level of self-awareness that you've had is just really powerful, and it is definitely something that I think one of the reasons why we show up the way we do with MaxLove Project and providing the resources and the support that we do, because families are traumatized and they're
Mhm.
coming in, there's the trauma of the diagnosis and everything thereafter.
Mhm.
And then usually the traumas in life that precede it that can make it
Mhm.
very hard to be regulated, uh, emotionally regulated in the process, and have that self-awareness and be able to take that step-by-step approach that you did, and even
Mhm.
honor your intuition. You can be too jumbled,
Mhm.
going through it to honor it. And we know what it's like for families to come in looking for a silver bullet,
Mhm.
believing that, there's got to be the one thing out there that nobody's found yet, or whatever it might be. And I totally
Mhm.
get that. It is a powerful coping mechanism that helps you move
Mhm.
forward, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I can identify some with, when Max was diagnosed, that process too, of like, what can I do? Like,
Mhm.
if there's got to be more that I can do at home.
Mhm.
So hold on one second. Hey guys, please? I am like actually doing a podcast right now, for real. You know that? And then you have to do dogs in there. Okay, can I continue? This is what we mean by keeping it real.
Hi, Maisie.
Yeah. So, that's my daughter Maisie, and she was 18 months old when Max was diagnosed. So she was like Camila's age when Camila was diagnosed. Like, so that age is seared in my brain. I think of Camila's diagnosis. I think of like Maisie was a baby. Yeah, that's like really, I don't know. For me, the empathy and the process for you, because I can like feel that age. They're so young. I remember thinking Max was so big when he was diagnosed because he was the oldest, right? And like he was a big guy, and I look back and like he was a baby too.
He was 4, right?
Little, yeah.
Yeah.
So we had a process of like an unfolding process of early morning headaches and vomiting. They like he was waking up at 5 a.m. screaming. He also had really weird things happen, like these really weird spasmodic big hiccup sounds in the middle of the night. It'd be like really kind of weird. He's the oldest and you don't really know, it's like hard to know what's happening. And he just went downhill. I mean, it was just like his status just went downhill. It moved into inability to walk. He couldn't go downstairs anymore. He couldn't use a jungle gym. So his balance was completely off. Getting call from the school, like he can't walk right now. And then we pick him up and he can walk. So these hydrocephalus attacks were like really brutal, but then they would resolve and you wouldn't know what's going on. So they treated him for a sinus infection, but it kept going and it got to the point of like incontinence. He fell off his bunk bed ladder and couldn't stand again. I mean, it was like really I think it got to be really bad. I think, I know had we tested, he could have been diagnosed earlier. That's one of the things that's with me of, this was 2011. And at that time, a lot of pediatricians didn't want to do any like CT scans or anything because there was a big movement against it. Parents were like, you're over testing, so, and we had a young pediatrician that was like really tuned into like young parents. And so it was just, I'll never forget, we went to have his diagnostic MRI at the hospital after we got in for an emergency MRI, and the doctor just apologized, but in our case, the doctor anesthesiologist called me back, and he said, all I can tell you is there's water on the brain. It's life-threatening. You have to go in an ambulance to the big hospital now. And the pediatrician then called me in that MRI room at the smaller children's hospital. And he said, it's a brain tumor. You're going to see the best neurosurgeon in the area. He's waiting for you at the hospital. So like all the nurses gather around, the chaplain comes in and they have me sign all this paperwork. And I'm just like, shocked, right?
Yeah.
Absolute. You're in shock.
Yeah.
And we get into the ambulance, and head up to the big children's hospital. And, I text Justin, who was teaching at the time at UCLA. And I just said, brain tumor, come now. Like, it was like, and I just could not, of course, couldn't hold it together. But, as soon as I saw him, I had to like, it was that balance of just like sucking it in and being like, it's like being there for him. So, Max had emergency brain surgery early. So that was a Friday, early Saturday morning, had emergency brain surgery. And he was intubated for days after that. And then we were in the hospital for about almost 4 weeks at that point. And, the biopsy took forever, like forever and ever and ever. So he had a tumor, or has tumors growing from his C-spine through his pons up to, so all through the brainstem from the bottom to the top into the midbrain. And then there was what they call an exophytic component that grew out into the fourth ventricle, into the cerebellum. It was a massive, massive brain tumor. And he had like horrendous hydrocephalus, like his ventricles were absolutely massive. His head was misshapen. He had all these curls, so you could hardly see it, but once it was pulled back and he had his haircut, you could see what it had done to him. And so our neurosurgeon, after the surgery, said, all I could do was take out some of that fourth ventricle, basically what was filling up the fourth ventricle, and he took out part of his cerebellum. But of course, I can't touch the brainstem, so he has all of this tumor remaining. And he said, treatment isn't going to work. The oncologists are going to come talk to you, but treatment to the brainstem doesn't work. They're going to have you go on chemo. And what I want you to do is understand that at some point, this treatment is going to compromise his quality of life. And at that point, I want you to agree with me to stop. If you choose to do it, like agree to stop and just give him quality of life. Like don't take that away from him, essentially. So what I was hearing is there's something we can do. Justin was hearing we're going to have like palliative chemotherapy, like what, this is not good. So I left with that seed planted of like, there's something that we can do. Although I have to tell you, it was like 2 weeks in, we're, in the hospital and we have a caseworker and all the stuff, and Max can't walk. He can hardly talk, all of the different things that come out of it, the posterior fossa syndrome and all that. And I look at his case manager and I was like, is this cancer? And she goes, oh, sweetie, yeah. And I was like, well, no one said that.
No one said the word. Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like no one said the word. No one said the word. And there was no diagnosis back yet. There was no pathology back, so no one said the word. So it turns out that, Max's diagnosis is significantly, of course, different than Camila's. And our neurosurgeon told us had 30 more days passed, it would have taken over his brainstem. He would have presented with such severe seizures that he would have been in a coma. So he said you were like a hair close, like to, like it was, this is what would have happened if you didn't bring him in now. So his brain was hemorrhaging at the point. It was just like so progressed. He was so sick when he went in. So then that next part after we got home from the hospital was really about getting him to be healthier, right? He was just in really, really bad shape. So the diagnosis came back. It had to be sent out again because it wasn't clear. It wasn't conclusive. We knew that it looked like a low-grade glioma under the microscope, but they also knew the way that it was behaving was somewhat different. So we had, years of sending out, sending stuff out. The Boston Children's Dana-Farber, Mark Kieran said it's a glioma that can't be categorized or graded. He spent 2 months on it and could not tell us what it was. And so he said it's like a toaster, essentially it's like, I can't give you the brand or any of that. So, and then Stanford told us that it depends on where you look at the sample. So it is mixed grade all the way through. And Dr. Manji said it was progressing to a grade 4. And that's what it looks like when it's in that stage of escalation. We then finally get molecular testing. So he had 5 recurrences, went on chemo. Let's see, we did 2 chemotherapy protocols, the low grade and the high grade, both, quote unquote, failed off of both because there was a recurrence right after, and found the ketogenic diet. We had already started MaxLove Project at that point. We started MaxLove Project in 2011, soon after Max was diagnosed, just to give back. And for me, it was a coping process. It was, my colleagues at work had given me time off, a year of time off. I had, I carried the benefits and I'm like, I'm gonna give back. And there were all these little projects that we could do at the hospital. And we then got the relationship with Cloud B and started giving out the Twilight Turtles. And I knew we needed a nonprofit. So we had started that. And by 2012, Max was in chemo. I had modified his diet, much like you, removing refined sugar. I had read the Robert Lustig article that was in the New York Times, and it was like, there's something here. There's something connected to this, right? Really focusing on like high fiber, whole foods. Hadn't really heard of the ketogenic diet yet. And then in 2012, Justin was at UCLA in the med libraries, and he starts reading about the ketogenic diet. He's like, there's really something here. Like we connect with Miriam Kalamian, and we like start doing that work of actually helping other families do the diet before we did. So we were on that path. We were holding cooking classes in the community by that point. We had started our Facebook group. And then Max has a major progression. He has to, at that point, we consent to radiation. But we presented our oncologist with the information on the ketogenic diet. And she said, you don't really have another choice. Like there's not much you can do. So may as well give it a try. Right. These are the concerns I have. She refers us to the keto clinic, who just like you only worked with epilepsy patients. We go there. We started the ketogenic diet in September of, was it September 2012? I think it was actually in 2013 that we actually started it. And he had like rapidly progressing disease. And we now know he has 2 mutations that are very unusual in a low-grade glioma. They're like GBM mutations that makes his glioma a high-risk low-grade glioma, which is why it keeps coming back, or hopefully kept coming back. So we go on the diet, and all of us, and by his November scan, when he's starting to get shunt work done, there was no growth. We're like, how does it go from rapidly progressing to not? What's the question? Like, what's the answer to that, right? How we would expect there to be a drug intervention or something, right? Like, we don't know of many cases where it's progressing and then it's not. So that was amazing. And that kind of like really started the process of people like looking at it. Like, this is something to look at. So by the time he then had another biopsy, and then another 2 brain surgeries, a shunt surgery, and radiation, all rapid fire, started radiation when he was on Jimmy Kimmel Live, right before he started radiation. And then, so he's in ketosis this whole time, going through all those brain surgeries, and then starts radiation. And he, just like Camila, he didn't need to go on steroids. His oncologist agreed, no need. And by the way, in all of his brain surgeries, the doctors were absolutely amazed. So looking at the difference of diagnosis when he was sick, he had to be intubated afterwards. It was so hard on him. It was such a difficult surgery. To when he was in ketosis, it was like, they're like, his vitals are perfect. He doesn't need pain meds after. He can go home days early, right? It was like a totally different story having the surgery with a really healthy kid in ketosis versus having a kid at diagnosis, presenting, who's very ill. So he goes every morning to radiation and goes to first grade and then plays softball in the afternoon. He was on cannabis therapy as well. Same thing, cannabis, keto. And he did incredibly well. Beyond, it was amazing. He then in another year had to have gamma knife radiation because a recurrence happened in the brainstem within the radiation field, which is not good. So the gamma knife was amazing, and we were told that it was incredible. The entire lesion resolved itself within 9 months, and it was unheard of, again, in ketosis. So we had about, 7.5, 8-year journey with a ketogenic diet until Max had a major progression in 2019. That essentially in the lower part of the brainstem left him with millimeters of functioning brainstem. And so it had gotten like come so close, like they were starting at that point to talk about palliative surgery, open up his spine, let the tumor grow out, so that he can still have functioning, and talking about, getting into starting to look at like what end of life care looks like. They put him on an inhibitor that is used in many low-grade gliomas that wasn't a direct target for his mutations. But so his oncologist apologized to us and said, I'm so sorry. Like, we're starting this too late. It's probably not going to work. And if it does work, it usually takes 6 months to work. He may not have that time. And I just want to apologize to you. Like, almost like we shouldn't have done the watchful waiting. We should have just gotten on it. Like, it's an unpredictable tumor. It worked. And we started to see actual resolution of some of the disease within 6 weeks, and started to pull back, or form into cysts and then like pull back and then resolve, like really, really cool, weird stuff. He had to go off the ketogenic diet at that point, and it caused significant metabolic dysfunction. And they don't know exactly why. This is the MEK inhibitor. For some people, it causes crazy metabolic issues where he had to just go on like a high protein, low carb diet, too much fat or too much carbohydrate. Either of those like energy sources are too much for it. So he did that for 2 years and is now 17 and has been mostly stable for about a year and a half. There's been a little bit of growth, but still watchful waiting. Like it's enough to not have to put him on anything. And so now we have a teenager we went from having a 4.5-year-old with brain tumors to a teenager with brain tumors. And so in the whole spectrum of that, every bit of the conversation that you have, from like when at the beginning we use narrative, like fighting the bad guys, empowering the good guys, your immune system, helping your immune system fight the bad guys, all the way to the science of it now. And what is this? And him taking his health into his own hands. He's at a tremendously high risk for radiation induced, high grade, for a presentation of a high grade tumor induced by radiation. And his mutations make it even higher. And so he puts, his health in his own hands, and the way that he takes care of himself is so impressive and amazing. And I was worried it was going to be like dysfunctional, like we'd have disordered eating and things like that because we had done keto for so long, but it's turned out to be a source of empowerment. And as Max has gone through all of this, MaxLove Project has grown tremendously alongside him. And what I find to be interesting about it is that since he's never qualified for a survivorship clinic, and he's been fairly constantly in this, we have always been able to somehow be present with families. Like had he done like a year's treatment and we were done and in survivorship, like I'm curious like what that would have felt like and how different that would be for us. But for us, we're so constantly in it. And also I feel like very present too with like most of my close friends in the community are actually bereaved moms. For whatever reason, they're my closest, the people that I'm closest to. There's something there. It's just something there where I feel like we are being asked to hold this journey in such a way of being present with it and continuing to learn. I don't know. It's hard for me to explain, but it has been a really long journey, and it's not done for him, but I feel like we're in a totally different place. We're not as anxious. I think we've processed a lot. I do think it's really hard on Max though, like that constant, like mortality question, I think is really difficult on a teenager. But it's been quite a journey, I think, experiencing this in sort of the constant nature of never being in like a neat category, I guess is what I'm saying, like in treatment and survivorship, whatever, like not like
Yeah.
having one of those. And I do think that that is the path for a lot of us in the future. Like, I think as we move into managing cancer as a chronic disease,
Right.
you know, like my friend Christine Wetzel has said, she's like, I'm not looking for a silver bullet in our research. I'm looking for a way that our kids can survive
Yeah.
with the disease,
Right.
right? If we can just
Yeah.
stop it from growing the way it grows,
Mm-hmm.
they can live. And so I see, and I know in Max's diagnosis with the pilomyxoid astrocytoma component to it in the brainstem, kids didn't survive that, you know, up to a few years ago, or a number of years ago. So the inhibitor treatments are what has made the difference with survival, but they're not NED.
Right.
These kids are surviving with the disease, right?
Right.
Like that's the thing. It's not about eradicating the disease. So were we given a gift at the beginning of not having a like grade 4 medulloblastoma where you had to blast it, like they have to blast that disease. They
Right.
constantly blast that disease. We were given a more palliative, like you know, slow kind of figured out treatment, but that allowed him to survive with the disease. And so, you
Right.
know, it just puts me in the position of wondering, is this a part of what MaxLove Project is here for?
Right.
To help be a part of the process of that new place of living with alongside you know,
Yeah.
the disease instead of and being with families who do have to blast the disease. Don't get me
Right.
wrong, like I get that. But for us, culinary medicine was important from the beginning, very much like you. So I went to culinary school and I was like, I know I can cook for him. Somebody, a close friend sent us Anti-Cancer: A New Way of Life by David Servan-Schreiber. Have you read that yet? Oh, read it. If
Okay.
you're a reader, read it. It is the most beautiful memoir. You know, he was one of the founders of Doctors Without Borders, here, bringing it here to the US from France. He's of French heritage, I think, and he is a neuroscientist. He was conducting a study and had a patient drop out of the MRI process. And so he subbed himself in, comes out of the MRI, and his team were like, you have a brain tumor. He ended up having an astrocytoma, and he survived the first, and then it recurred. And the memoir is about the recurrence and about what he had learned. He said, I went back to my life, same old after the first. McDonald's, no sleep, no whatever. And to the second, he said, you have to look at your terrain, you know, and he focused on diet, exercise, sleep, all the things, spirituality, all of these things. And it's a gorgeous memoir. He died of a recurrence about a few months before Max was diagnosed. I think it was, or a few months after, something like that. But he had an incredible quality of life for the time that he had. And so that was like foundational. It was like, as soon as we get out of here, we're going to start figuring out what to feed him. And that was this is one of the things that I can do.
Yeah.
What else? I can do acupuncture, right? But we were immediately faced with, and I don't know if you felt this, like it was just immediate. These were the responses to us. Cause like the story catches on. We weren't on Facebook yet. We were on like, we went on Caring Bridge, I think, but it was just text messages. And it was before there were a lot of families or any childhood cancer stuff on Facebook in 2011. So it was like, you know, early on. And we would get comments like, don't trust your doctors. Doctors are not trustworthy.
Yeah.
Don't do conventional medicine. You're just poisoning your child. Like only do these alternative things. Here are the things that cured this random adult or whatever. And I have to admit also things like outlandish things like you need to bathe yourself in the blood of Christ to save your child. Like, I'm just going to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something to say to a parent when their
Yeah.
child is diagnosed with cancer. Please don't say that.
Yeah.
Even if you're thinking it, do not write it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say it. It was just beyond, right? Like all of the unsolicited advice. It was so overwhelming. We put together an email address, a Gmail, and I just said, thank you so much. Can you email your ideas to this? And I never looked at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just like, no, if there's a kernel of something good in there, we will circle around to it. Like we will get there. But that was really, really challenging. And I thought, like, where do families go to get this information?
Yeah.
This is not okay. That there's like not a good evidence-based, sane, supportive,
Right.
uplifting, caring, everything. What are the things that we can do that are evidence-based, right? How do we have these conversations with our doctor? Like, what do we do? So that's when MaxLove Project really found its mission, like moving away from not away, but like growing with the Twilight Turtles and the sleep support and kind of that comfort, care, and love into, Justin and I are both educators, like you, readers. What can we do to help people get a couple steps ahead with this information? What can we do to bring it together and support people with everything that we're learning? Like, this information shouldn't just sit with us. It needs to go into a place that can help other people. And so that's been the goal really from the earliest days. Like, what can we do to help support, build a community? Like, we, at that point, when Max was diagnosed, had no way of meeting other people. I was looking at I remember looking at Yahoo bulletin boards at the time, trying to find parents with similar diagnoses, and nobody would write back. And I would find out like the kid, didn't survive the diagnosis. And because back in the day, even with a low-grade glioma, a brainstem presentation wasn't survivable. So that's the kind of like the parent Max focused background of MaxLove Project and how we come to this. And then now, we're 13 years later.
Yeah. And
we're still working hard to build this grassroots nonprofit organization. We're still super grassroots. We have an amazing small and mighty team. But we are always struggling, I think, with funding and resources because what we do is so different. I think it makes it really hard. Funding research, there's just something about the magic of funding research where it feels like you're funding hope, which you are in many ways. Like I totally support research. Like I believe in it so much. But people get it. You ask people in your community and they get, oh yeah, sure. $25 for cancer research, 100%. $25 for quality of life care and education. What? What is that? And does the hospital not provide that already?
Right.
No. The hospital isn't built for it. It's not, I'm not blaming the hospital in any way. The hospital was built for critical care and for that life-saving moment of arriving there in an ambulance. The whole process of cancer becoming something that people are going to the hospital for years for is newer to the critical care setting. And so the critical care setting doesn't really know how to be a chronic care setting, right? So we're trying to bring that quality of life care into it. And, it's just challenging, I think, for people to get it until you've experienced it.
Yeah, I think you're playing on a part of, I always look at it as on this journey, the percentage of you being in the hospital versus at home waiting to hear from the hospital is a really big balancing act because you're like, you're told something in a 30-minute meeting with a doctor, then you're sent home, and then you're at home waiting for that email, for that call of like what you should do next, when's the next appointment, everything like that. So people don't understand there's this huge portion of time where you're just sitting and you're looking at your child and you're gonna start thinking, what can I do to help while I'm sitting here at home? You know, that's where my
Right.
brain went. And I'm always, you know, trying to paint that picture to people of like even doctors being like, imagine this. Like you have all these patients, you're busy. When we hear from you, we grasp onto it. But there's this whole
Yep.
other part of time where we're by ourselves and we're figuring it out day by day,
Yep.
hour by hour, trying to do the best for our child. And a lot of that is this supportive care of, you know, we're going to be really into
Yep.
what they're having for breakfast, how they're sleeping,
Yep.
which doctors aren't going to ask you about that, to your
Nope.
point, because they're focused on the disease and that critical care of the disease,
Yep.
which makes complete sense. And I think it's
Yep.
important to think about that as like a team, right? That's what their job is. Our
Yep.
job in a lot of ways is to support that quality of life, and
Yep.
we should be supporting that family in doing so, because
100%.
there's so many components that can make that really hard for a parent.
I couldn't agree more. Couldn't
Mhm.
agree more. Yeah, even in the most ideal relationship between medical team and parent,
Mhm.
right? It would be a team-based approach. And it would be something where that is fully kind of on the table out in the open
Mhm.
and understood and acknowledged. And one thing that we saw with Max Love is like we've had personally good relationships with our medical team. And we know so many families who don't for many, many
Mhm.
reasons. You know, we've lived in major metropolitan areas. We've gone to major hospitals, you know, like you guys.
Mhm.
Um, and it can be very different than the stories that I hear from families across
Yeah.
the country with what they're going through. So it's like, how can we, I know when we got into it, we're like, you have this ivory tower sort of thing of like, you know nothing about what happens in that children's hospital, right? And then you end
Mhm.
up in it and you think this care is going to be incredible because it's for a child
Mhm.
whose life is on the line. And right, like, so it's going to be, and this is going to be the most state of the art care. I remember thinking like the MRIs are going to be like Anderson Cooper in election season, like when you pull out the state and like show that, you know,
Oh, yeah.
like I had this vision of this
Mhm.
room with like TVs and they'd be like 3D brain and they'd be like,
Mhm.
whatever, you know, and meanwhile, you know, you get the report back and it's like, do you have measurements? No, we don't really, can't really do that. What do you
Mhm.
mean you can't do that? Right. And so the variations, you soon see that it's like any other system, it's who you know,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? Who you can be introduced to, who you have direct access to at the most, like at the biggest, best institutions. And folks in other places are struggling.
Mhm.
And it can feel like you are at a flu clinic. You think this is a childhood cancer diagnosis, and you go to most any of these hospitals and you're like, wait a second.
Mhm.
Why does it feel like I am at some like routine, you know, clinic with these
Mhm.
long lines and all of the different, you know, all the different, like, it's just, it's to me stunning, um, how I think under resourced the system is.
Mhm.
And this is what I've heard from friends and people I know who run children's hospitals now. After all these years, we've done a lot of work with hospitals. Children's hospitals are under resourced.
Mhm.
They do not have the fraction of the resources of adult hospitals because children, it's a niche, considered a niche population in
Mhm.
comparison. And so you've got that, you've got a fragmented system where you have oncologists in, you know, more rural hospitals who have to know every diagnosis.
Mhm.
There are like 30 presentations at least of childhood cancers, and you're supposed to be an oncologist who knows every one of them.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
just, I feel like, you know, I get it. It's tough. The system is tough, you know, and it's tough to navigate and you're thrown into it, not knowing anything. And it can be just traumatizing engaging with the system alone, right? So can we do anything to help with that? That's one of
Mhm.
the things that we wanted to do, is just help families engage with the system and going through that trauma. And we're trying to do the best they can to take care of their kid while they have their kid at home and they have their kid in the hospital.
Mhm. Yeah.
Straight up.
Straight up.
So that's what we'll be talking about. We're going to talk about care, quality of life, obviously, is like a central point for us. We're going to talk about emotional health.
Mhm.
We're going to talk about grief. We will talk about bereavement, child loss. We will talk about survivorship. We'll talk about research. We'll talk about drugs. We'll talk about integrative therapies. I think the first conversation we're going to produce after this, if we decide to, is going to be the one with Dr. Goldstein on cannabis
Mhm.
medicine, which is going to be
Mhm.
great. We will take people's suggestions. And if you want to learn about MaxLove Project, you can read the caption, whatever it is, the part of this, the part that's written underneath the video, where we'll have information, and our website, maxloveproject.org, and you can learn more about it. And we're hoping that you share our content. One of our goals with this is to be able to use YouTube more and try to raise more awareness for MaxLove Project. We want to get more people involved, get more people utilizing the resources that we offer.
Mhm.
We do have an online app and private community, maxloveconnect.org, for our families. Any family can go and answer a couple of quick questions, and we'll let you in. And our amazing social worker, Jenny, will be in touch after that. And in that app, we have so many resources. It
Mhm.
is so incredible. We've got e-learning courses, and we have topics and groups and recipes, and we have cooking classes, and we have our events. And I think the thing is this is a really ideal space for people who want an uplifting, kind of like positive environment community,
Mhm.
who don't want to be sucked into social media because it's not on social media, it's private, and who really want to learn. We offer a ton of educational resources,
Mhm.
self-traveled, things that you can dig into yourself, and then we also have support groups and things like that. And we'll be talking about a lot of that content on this podcast and what we engage with, but it's really designed for families who, want to dig in more,
Yeah.
and engage with material. I think that Jenny, our social worker, is amazing for families who are right in the trauma, maybe don't even have the capacity to do the information
Mhm.
gathering. She's just great to talk to. So there's that resource as well. But I think Max Love is really for families who do want to focus on quality of life care and want to get involved and want to learn and want to be surrounded by people like them.
Mhm.
And that's from like diagnosis in through our bereavement programming, like the whole spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd also add too, with this podcast, we'd hope to share children's stories. Like if we'll talk to parents and, share their child's story, just to also bring voice to, what these kids go through. Like I know I've heard Max's story so many times, but even just the little snippets that you added today, like I'm still astounded, by the impressive young man he is today. So
Oh,
I
thank
think,
you.
yeah, broadening the
Yeah.
access that these are kids and, what they're going
Yeah.
through, the hope that they bring to with their story is something
Yeah.
that we'd also love to share on this podcast.
100%. And I can already see some of the conversations with
Mhm.
families of all kinds of varied diagnoses that are going to be
Mhm.
so powerful. And if anybody has a recommendation or a family they'd like to nominate, please let
Yeah.
us know, put it into the comments.
Mhm.
But I think, did we cover what we wanted to cover today? I wanted to do the whole other thing about like what kind of the categories with Max Love, but we've gone long enough. I feel like it went way too
Yeah.
on
I think
long
we
with
can do a
Max's
whole
story.
episode on that.
Yeah, we'll do
No.
another
This was a good
episode with that.
introduction.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, awesome. So we will sign off for now. And Sam, it's been a pleasure talking with you as
Always a
always. I
pleasure.
just love it. And I'm going to stop the recording. Okay, bye everybody.